Hello, welcome to Untold Travel Stories. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey across the world, from one end of the earth to the other, told in a way you've never heard before. Dim the lights in your room, lean back, and let the sound of this video carry you. I arrived in Cairo the way I always arrived now, without remembering the crossing, without remembering the border. One moment I was somewhere else. The next moment I was here. And here was a city so vast, so dense, so layered with time, that it did not feel like a city at all. It felt like a living fossil. A body made of stone and dust and prayer, still breathing, even though no one was left to breathe for it. I opened my eyes on a rooftop, a flat rooftop, concrete, with a low wall around the edges. A clothesline strung from one side to the other, laundry still hanging on it. Faded, sun bleached, a man's shirt, a woman's dress, a child's small pair of pants. The wind moved the laundry, very gently, very slowly, as if the wind too was trying not to disturb anything. I stood up. I walked to the edge of the rooftop. I looked out, and Cairo opened beneath me. I had seen large cities before. Mexico City had been vast. Istanbul had been ancient. But Cairo was something else entirely. Cairo was a city that had been building itself on top of itself for 1,000 years, layer upon layer, century upon century, mosque upon mosque, minaret upon minaret. From this rooftop I could see hundreds of minarets, hundreds rising from every direction, thin ones, thick ones, round ones, square ones, some with crescent moons still gleaming at their tips, some crumbling, some perfect. 1,000 minarets, 1,000 fingers pointing at the sky, 1,000 silent calls to a prayer that no one was left to hear. I came down from the rooftop, through a narrow staircase inside the building, past doors that were closed, past doors that were open, past a kitchen where a pot sat on a cold stove, past a room where a radio sat on a shelf, its cord plugged into a dead wall. I came out into the street. Cairo's streets were narrow, narrower than any streets I had walked before. The buildings on both sides rose 4, 5, 6 stories high, and they leaned toward each other, not from age, from design, as if they had been built to create shade, to protect the street below from the sun that in this country was not a friend, but a force. The shade worked, even now, even without people to appreciate it. I walked through the narrow streets in cool shadow. My footsteps echoed off the stone walls, and the echo returned to me changed, softened, as if the city was swallowing the sound and giving back only the gentlest part of it. I passed a bakery. The door was open. I went inside. The smell hit me before I saw anything. Even after all this time, even after years, maybe, of emptiness, the smell of bread was still in the walls, baked into the stone of the oven, into the wood of the shelves, into the very air of the room. Bread. The oldest food, the simplest food, the food that every civilization in every corner of the world had invented for itself. And the smell of it, the ghost of it, was still here. I stood in the bakery for a long time, just breathing. On the counter, I found a small pile of flour in a wooden bowl. It had hardened into a solid mass, but it was still flour, still made from wheat that had been grown in the fields beside the Nile, ground by stones carried to this bakery by hands that had known exactly how much to use for each day's bread. I touched the flour. It was hard as stone under my fingers, but the dust that came off it was still white, still fine, still smelling faintly of wheat. I left the flour where it was. I did not take it, but I carried the smell with me when I left. Some things you take with you not in your bag, but in your breath. I walked deeper into old Cairo, into the district they once called Islamic Cairo, the medieval heart of the city. Here the buildings were older, the stones were darker. The doorways were carved with geometric patterns so intricate that I had to stop and trace them with my eyes, line by line, turn by turn, trying to find where the pattern began and where it ended. I could not find either. The patterns had no beginning and no end. That was the point. That was the theology carved into stone. God has no beginning, God has no end, and the patterns on these doors were a small proof of infinity made by human hands from ordinary stone. I came to a mosque, not a small neighborhood mosque, a great mosque, with a courtyard large enough to hold 1,000 people. With the fountain in the center, dry now, its marble basin cracked, but the carved flowers around its edge still perfect, with arched walkways on all four sides, with a minaret that rose so high I had to tilt my head all the way back to see its top. I took off my shoes at the entrance. I stepped onto the stone floor of the courtyard. The stone was warm under my bare feet, heated by the sun that came down into this open space like a river of light. I walked to the center, to the dry fountain. I sat on its edge, and I listened. In a mosque this size, silence has a shape. It is not flat, it is not thin, it is round, full, like the inside of a dome. The silence fills every corner, every arch, every carved surface, and it holds itself there, gently, the way water holds itself inside a bowl. I sat inside this bowl of silence, and I felt, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that silence is not nothing. Silence is the thing that remains when everything else has been taken away, and what remains, after everything, is not empty. It is essential. I spent the rest of the day in old Cairo. I walked through covered bazaars, Khan el-Khalili. I knew the name from somewhere. The bazaar was a labyrinth, narrow covered lanes, one leading into another, turning and branching and doubling back. Stalls on both sides, lamps, brass lamps, hundreds of them, hanging from hooks and chains, their glass panels colored red and blue and green. They did not light up, of course, but they caught the daylight that filtered through the gaps in the roof, and they glowed faintly, like memories of fire. On the shelves of one stall, perfume bottles, tiny, glass, shaped like teardrops, like flowers, like birds, each one empty, each one still smelling, faintly, of the oil it had once held. Rose, jasmine, sandalwood, oud. I picked up one of the bottles, I held it to my nose, I breathed in, jasmine, very faint, almost gone, but there. A woman had once bought this bottle, perhaps, had dabbed a drop on her wrist, had walked through these same streets, trailing a thin line of jasmine behind her. And someone, her husband, her child, a stranger, had smelled it as she passed, and had felt, for one moment, that the world was beautiful. The world was still beautiful, even without the woman, even without the jasmine. The bottle remembered. And now I remembered too. That evening I found a house to sleep in the old quarter. A house with a small interior courtyard, a wooden mashrabiyah screen on the upper floor, a carved lattice window through which the women of the house had once watched the street below without being seen. I climbed to the upper floor. I sat behind the mashrabiyah. I looked down at the empty street through the carved holes in the wood, and I imagined that I was one of them, watching, waiting, seeing the world through small carved openings, knowing the world without the world knowing me. In a way, that was exactly what I was doing. I was seeing this world through small openings, through the openings that the world itself had left for me. A jar of flour, a perfume bottle, a clothesline on a rooftop, small openings, small windows into lives that had been lived, and then let go. I took the watch from my pocket, I opened it. I will come back to you, M. The ticking was there, faint, steady, the same rhythm it had always had. We are in Egypt, I said to the watch. In Cairo, the city of 1,000 minarets. None of them are calling, but all of them are standing, and standing in this world is its own kind of prayer. The watch ticked. Once, twice. I closed it. I leaned my head against the mashrabiyah screen, and I slept. In my dream, the minarets were calling. All of them. At once. 1,000 voices rising into the Cairo sky, weaving together into a single sound that was not a word, not a melody, but something older than both. When I woke, the city was silent again, but the sound was still inside me, warm, resonant, like a bell that has been struck and is still humming, long after the hand has pulled away. I left old Cairo in the morning, walking west, toward the edge of the city, toward the place where the city ended and the desert began, because in Cairo, the desert does not start gradually, it starts suddenly. One step you're on pavement, the next step you're on sand. One step there are buildings, the next step there is nothing but flat, open, burning land. And on that edge, on the line between the city and the desert, the pyramids stood. I had seen them before, on my first journey, briefly. I had touched a stone, I had written in my notebook, I had slept one night in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, and then moved on. But this time was different. This time, I was not passing through. This time, I was staying. I walked toward them across the sand, slowly. The morning sun was already hot. The air shimmered above the ground, making the pyramids dance and waver, as if they were not quite solid, as if they were made of heat as much as stone. But as I got closer, they became solid. Very solid. More solid than anything I had ever stood next to. The Great Pyramid, Khufu's pyramid, the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the only one still standing. I had read that somewhere, or known it from some life before this one. I stood at its base. I looked up. The stones were enormous, each one taller than me, each one wider than my outstretched arms, and there were millions of them, stacked, fitted together so precisely that even after 5,000 years, you could not slide a piece of paper between them. 5,000 years. I tried to feel what 5,000 years meant. I could not. The number was too large. It was like trying to feel the distance to a star. Your mind could know it, but your body could not hold it. I placed my hand on the stone, warm from the sun, rough from 5,000 years of wind and sand, and I held my hand there for a long time, because this stone, this particular stone, under my particular hand, had been touched by millions of hands before mine, and it would be touched by whom? By no one, maybe. By me, and then by no one. I might be the last hand this stone would ever feel. I walked around the base of the pyramid. It took a long time. The base was enormous. Each side was over 200 meters long. I walked slowly, counting my steps, feeling the sand under my feet, feeling the shadow of the pyramid fall over me on one side and the full blaze of the sun hit me on the other. On the far side of the pyramid, away from the city, there was nothing, only desert, stretching west, forever. I stood there, the pyramid behind me, the desert in front of me, and I understood for the first time why the pyramids had been built here. On this exact spot, on the edge between the living and the dead, between the green valley of the Nile, where life grew, and the western desert, where the sun went to die every evening. The pyramids were not just tombs, they were doorways, standing on the threshold between 2 worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead, and now, in this new empty world, that threshold had dissolved. The living world and the dead world had merged into one, and the pyramids stood in the middle, neither here nor there, neither alive nor dead, just standing. I spent 3 days at Giza. I explored the smaller pyramids, the Queen's pyramids, the mortuary temples, the long causeways of stone that led from the valley up to the plateau. I sat for a whole afternoon in front of the Sphinx. The Sphinx was smaller than I had expected, or maybe not smaller, just more intimate, a human face on a lion's body, looking east, always east, toward the rising sun. The face was worn, the nose was gone, broken long ago, by someone whose name history had recorded but I could not remember. The lips were cracked, the eyes were hollow, but the Sphinx was still looking, still watching the eastern horizon, still waiting for the sun to rise, as it had waited every morning for 5,000 years. I sat in front of it, and I looked at its face, and it looked past me at the sun. We were doing different things, the Sphinx and I. I was looking at the past. The Sphinx was looking at the future. It had always been looking at the future. That was its job. To watch, to wait, to be patient. And patience, I had learned, was not a passive thing. Patience was the most active thing in the world. Patience was the choice to keep watching, even when there was nothing to see. On my last evening at Giza, I climbed partway up the Great Pyramid. I know I should not have. In the old world, it was forbidden. But in this world, there were no rules. There were no guards. There were no ropes. It was only me and the stones and the sky. I climbed about 30 meters up. Each stone was a step, a large step. I had to use my hands and my arms to pull myself up. When I stopped and sat down on one of the stones, I could see the whole city of Cairo to the east, brown and grey and sprawling, and to the west, the desert. Gold and endless, and above me, the pyramid continued, rising to its peak. Far above me, impossibly far, I sat on the stone. I watched the sun set over the desert. The sky turned the colors I had seen many times now. Gold, orange, red, purple, then dark blue, then black, and the stars came out, desert stars. The same desert stars I had seen in the Sahara on my first journey. Bright, close, crowded together like a city of light above a city of stone. I took out my notebook. I wrote by the last light of the day. Giza. I am sitting on a pyramid. Halfway up. The sun has just set. The stars are coming out. Below me, a city of 20 million people, or what was once a city of 20 million people, is dark and silent. Above me, the peak of a structure built by 100,000 hands 5,000 years ago points at a star that was important to someone once, for a reason I will never fully understand. And I am between the city and the peak, between the ground and the sky, between the past and whatever comes next. I think this is where I have always been, between things, in the space where the questions live. And maybe that space, that in-between, is not a place to pass through. Maybe it is the place to stay. I closed the notebook. I climbed back down in the dark, slowly, carefully, feeling each stone with my hands before trusting it with my weight. At the bottom, I walked back to the small building where I had been sleeping. I lay down on the floor. I pulled my blanket over me, and I slept. Tomorrow I would follow the Nile, south, into the heart of Egypt, into the places where the oldest stories in the world had been carved into stone and were still waiting to be read. I want to pause here for just a moment. If this story is reaching you tonight, if these words are walking beside you in the dark, please consider subscribing to this channel and leaving a like on this video. Every subscription, every like, every comment tells me that someone out there is listening, and knowing that someone is listening is the reason I keep telling these stories. Thank you, traveler. Now let us continue south. I left Cairo walking south, along the river. The Nile was my road now, as the Ganges had been my road in India, as the Bosphorus had been my compass in Istanbul. Rivers know where they are going, and a man who does not know where he is going does well to follow something that does. The city thinned slowly behind me. First, the tall buildings became shorter, then the shorter buildings became houses, then the houses became farms, then the farms became fields, and then it was just the river and me. The Nile was wider here than I had expected. Brown, slow, full of silt carried from places far to the south. Places where rain still fell on mountains I would never see. The water did not look clean, but it looked alive. It had a thickness to it, a richness. As if the water itself were made of earth as much as water, and maybe it was. The Nile had been carrying the soil of Africa northward for millions of years. The soil that had made Egypt possible, the soil that had fed the pharaohs and the farmers and the children who had played on these same banks. I walked along a path that followed the river, a dirt path, worn smooth by feet and hooves and the wheels of carts. On one side the river, on the other side fields. The fields were green. This surprised me. After the brown of the desert and the grey of the city, the green of the Nile Valley was almost shocking. Bright green, thick green, the green of things that are growing fast and are not afraid. Crops were still growing, without anyone to plant them or tend them or harvest them. The last planting, years ago, had dropped its seeds, and the seeds had grown and dropped their own seeds and grown again and again, without any human hand. The Nile Valley was feeding itself. I walked through these green fields for days. The air was warm. The sky was wide. The river moved beside me, always beside me, patient and brown and endless. I passed small villages along the banks, mud brick houses, flat roofs, palm trees bending over the water. In each village the same things. A small mosque, a few donkeys, alive, standing in the shade, looking at me with eyes that were neither curious nor afraid. A well, a clay oven in someone's courtyard. In one village, I stopped to rest by the river. I sat under a palm tree. The fronds above me made a sound I had not heard before. A dry, papery whisper, different from the sound of pine needles, different from the rustle of oak leaves, a sound that belonged only to this place, to this river, to this heat. A small boat was tied to a wooden post near the shore. A felucca, I knew the word from somewhere, a traditional Nile sailboat. Its hull was wooden, painted blue and white. Its single mast stood straight. Its sail was furled, tied with ropes that had loosened over time. I waded into the shallow water. I untied the rope. I climbed into the felucca. It rocked beneath me, gently, the way a hammock rocks, the way a cradle rocks, the oldest rocking in the world. I unfurled the sail. It was old canvas, stained with years of sun and river spray, but it was whole. No holes, no tears. The wind caught it, and the boat began to move, south, upstream, against the current but with the wind, because on the Nile the wind blows from the north, always from the north, and the current flows to the north. So, if you want to go south, you sail. If you want to go north, you drift. The ancient Egyptians had known this. They had designed their whole civilization around this fact. The wind and the current, working in opposite directions, making the river a two-way road. I was using this road now, going south. With a wind that had been blowing for 5,000 years, I sailed for many days. The rhythm of the felucca was slow, very slow, slower than walking, but I did not mind, because on the river, speed was not the point. The point was the movement itself, the gentle rocking, the sound of water against the hull, the creak of the mast, the flap of the sail when the wind shifted. I slept in the felucca at night. I lay on the wooden floor, with my blanket beneath me, and I watched the stars move slowly above the mast. The mast swayed against the stars, a small dark line crossing back and forth across the Milky Way. I ate what I found in the villages I stopped at. Dates. There were dates everywhere, hanging from the palms in great heavy clusters, brown and sweet and so full of sugar that one handful could sustain me for half a day. I filled my pockets with dates. I ate them as I sailed, dropping the pits into the river. Maybe one day downstream, one of those pits would wash ashore and grow into a palm, and someone would eat a date from that palm and not know that it had been planted, accidentally, by a man in a felucca who did not know his own name. The landscape along the Nile changed as I went south. The green strip of farmland on either side of the river grew narrower. The desert on both sides came closer. Sometimes the cliffs came right down to the water's edge. Red cliffs, carved by the river over millions of years, with caves and holes in them that looked like dark eyes watching the water. I sailed past ancient temples cut into the cliffs, some of them half buried in sand, some of them still standing, their columns rising from the riverbank like the legs of giants wading into the water. I did not stop at all of them. I could not. There were too many. 5,000 years of building, all along this river. Too much to see, too much to hold. But I stopped at some. At one temple, small, half-collapsed, its roof gone, I went inside and found the walls covered in carvings. Hieroglyphs, the old picture writing of the Egyptians, birds, eyes, hands, snakes, feathers, water, the sun, each symbol meaning something, each symbol part of a language that had been spoken and written and carved and painted for 3,000 years before it had been forgotten. I traced the carvings with my fingers, the way I had traced the Persian script on the garden wall in Afghanistan, the way I had traced the Kirill letters in Bulgaria. I could not read them, but I could feel them, the depth of the carving, the care of the hand that had made it, the intention behind each line. Someone had stood here in this exact spot with a chisel and a hammer and had carved these symbols into the stone, one tap at a time, for hours, for days, for the rest of their working life maybe. And the symbols were still here, 5,000 years later, still saying whatever they had been meant to say. I did not need to read them. The fact that they endured was the message. I sailed on, south, always south, the wind in my sail, the river beneath me, the sun above me, moving from east to west, day after day, the way it had moved since before there were eyes to watch it. One evening, as the sun was setting, I saw something ahead of me on the eastern bank. Columns, hundreds of columns, rising from the earth like a stone forest. Massive columns, carved, painted, the paint mostly gone, but hints of it still clinging to the stone in places. Red, blue, gold. I brought the felucca to the bank. I tied it to a palm tree. I climbed the bank, and I walked toward the columns. Luxor. The ancient Egyptians had called it Wayset. The Greeks had called it Thebes. The Arabs had called it Al-Uqsa, the palaces. Because when the Arab conquerors had first seen these ruins, they had thought they were palaces. They could not believe that a temple could be this large. And standing among the columns of Karnak, because that was where I was, I realized the great temple complex of Karnak. I understood why. The columns were the tallest things I had ever stood next to that had been made by human hands, taller than the pillars of any church, taller than the minarets of Cairo. Each column was wide enough that 4 people could stand around its base with their arms outstretched and not touch each other, and there were hundreds of them, arranged in rows, creating a forest of stone. I walked between them. The light of the setting sun came through the gaps between the columns in long golden beams, and the beams hit the carved surfaces of the stone and lit up the old paint, traces of red, traces of blue, so that for a moment, just a moment, I could see what this place had looked like when it was alive. Golden light, painted stone, incense smoke rising, the sound of chanting, the rustle of white linen robes, all of it gone. But all of it somehow still present, held in the stone, held in the light, held in the silence between the columns. I walked through Karnak for hours, until the sun had fully set, and the stars came out, and the columns became black shapes against the sky. I slept that night inside the temple, in a small side chamber, on a stone floor that was still warm from the day's sun. I did not dream. Or if I dreamed of stone. And stone, when you dream of it, is the most restful dream there is. In the morning, I crossed the river. Because on the western bank of the Nile, across from Luxor, was the place where the dead had been buried, the Valley of the Kings. I walked into the valley from the river. The path climbed through dry, barren hills. Brown stone, no plants, no water, no shade. The heat was intense. The sun hit the stone, and the stone threw the heat back up at me, so that I was being cooked from above and below at the same time. But I walked, because this was a place I needed to see. The valley was narrow, steep walls on both sides, and in the walls cut into the stone entrances, dark rectangular holes in the bright stone, the tombs. 63 tombs had been cut into this valley. 63 pharaohs and queens and nobles had been buried here, deep inside the mountain, surrounded by gold and jewels and painted walls and everything they believed they would need in the next world. Most of the gold was gone, taken long ago by tomb robbers, by conquerors, by archaeologists. But the tombs themselves remained, and the paintings on their walls remained. I entered one of the tombs, a long corridor sloping downward into the earth. The air grew cooler as I descended. The light from the entrance faded. I took my lighter from my pocket. I flicked it on, a small flame. Enough to see. The walls were covered in paintings. I cannot fully describe what I saw. Colors so vivid they looked like they had been painted yesterday. Blue, gold, red, green, black, white, figures of gods with animal heads, a jackal, an ibis, a falcon, the sun painted as a golden disc, stars painted on the ceiling of the corridor, so that the dead pharaoh could look up and see the sky even from deep inside the mountain, and the pharaoh himself, painted on the wall, standing tall in his white crown, his hands holding the symbols of power, his eyes looking forward, into the next world, into eternity. I walked deeper. The corridor turned, then turned again, then opened into a large chamber, the burial chamber in the center, a stone sarcophagus. The lid was off, moved long ago by someone looking for the gold inside. The sarcophagus was empty, but the walls were alive. Every surface was painted, every surface told a story. The pharaoh's journey through the underworld, the weighing of his heart against a feather, the gods he would meet, the dangers he would face, the final judgment. I stood in the center of this chamber, in the burial chamber of a king who had died 3,000 years ago. In the complete silence of the inside of a mountain, and I felt that the king was still here. Not his body, not his gold, not his crown, his intention, his hope, his fear, his desperate human hope that death was not the end, that there was something after, that the paintings on these walls were not just decoration, but a map, a guide, a way through the darkness. I sat down on the floor of the burial chamber. I turned off my lighter. I sat in complete darkness, and for a long time I just sat, in the dark, in the silence, in the inside of a mountain, in the tomb of a king. And I was not afraid, because darkness, I had learned, is not the opposite of light. Darkness is the place where light has not yet arrived. And sitting in darkness, without fear, without trying to light a flame, without trying to see, is its own kind of seeing. The deepest kind. When I finally stood up and lit my lighter again, and walked back up the long corridor, and came out into the blinding white light of the valley, I felt as if I had been born again. Not dramatically, not with trumpets and light, quietly. The way a seed pushes through soil, the way a river finds its way around a stone, I had gone into the earth, and I had come back out. And something had changed. I could not name what had changed, but it had changed. I walked back to the river. I got into my felucca. I untied the rope. And I continued south. The wind filled my sail. The current pushed against my hull. The sun moved across the sky. And the Nile that had seen everything, carried everything, buried everything, and was still, after all of it, flowing, carried me on. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened it. I will come back to you. M. I went into a tomb today. I said to the watch, into the dark, into the mountain. And I came back. I always come back. That is maybe what the promise means. Not to return to a place, but to return, always. From every darkness, from every depth. To come back. To keep going. To hold the watch and say, I am still here. The watch ticked, faintly, steadily. I closed it. I put it back. The river carried me south. The Nile changed as I sailed further south. It became narrower. The banks came closer together. The cliffs on either side grew taller, darker. The stone here was not the pale limestone of the north. It was granite, black granite, red granite. The kind of stone that does not wear down easily. The kind of stone that the pharaohs had chosen for their most important monuments, because they knew it would last, and it had lasted. The river also became calmer, slower, as if it were gathering its strength before pushing through the narrow places ahead. I sailed past islands, small granite islands in the middle of the river. Some of them had palm trees growing on them. Some had the ruins of small temples. Some were just bare rock, polished smooth by millennia of water. On one island, I saw a bird I had never seen before. Large, white, with a long curved beak. It stood on a rock at the water's edge, perfectly still, watching the river with the patience of something that has been watching rivers since before humans existed. I sailed past it slowly. The bird did not move. It watched me pass the way a statue watches, without turning its head, without blinking. And then I was past it. And it was behind me, and the river continued. I arrived in Aswan on a late afternoon when the light was turning the color of honey. The city climbed up a hillside on the eastern bank of the river, low buildings, sand-colored, with domes and minarets visible above the rooftops. And along the waterfront, a long promenade of stone with benches and palm trees and iron railings. I tied the felucca to a post on the promenade. I climbed out. I stretched my legs, which had been cramped from days of sitting on the wooden floor of the boat. Aswan was quieter than Cairo, quieter than Luxor, not just because it was smaller, because the quality of the silence was different in Cairo. The silence had been heavy, full of echoes of millions of lives, the silence of a great city that has been emptied. In Aswan, the silence was light, open. The silence of a small town that had always been quieter than the rest of the country, a town where the rhythm of life had been slower, where the days had been longer, where people had sat on their doorsteps in the evening and watched the river without needing to say anything. That kind of silence does not change much when the people leave, because the silence was always there. The people had only been sitting inside it. I walked along the promenade. The Nile was wide here, and in the middle of the river there was an island, large, green, covered in palm trees and flowering shrubs and the ruins of old buildings, Elephantine Island. I knew the name from somewhere. The ancient Egyptians had called it Abu. It had been a trading post, a border town, the southern edge of Egypt, where the country ended and Africa began. I looked at the island for a long time from the promenade, the green of it against the blue of the river, against the gold of the desert hills behind it. 3 colors, 3 worlds, meeting here at this exact point, and somehow not conflicting. That is the gift of geography. When the land itself makes peace between things that should not coexist and holds them together, gently, the way a mother holds 2 quarreling children. I found a small rowboat at the edge of the promenade. I took it across to the island. The island was beautiful in a way that was almost painful, because beauty, when there is no one to share it with, becomes a kind of ache, a fullness that has nowhere to go. I walked through the ruins of an old temple, small, its columns short and simple, not the grandeur of Karnak, the modesty of a border town that did not need to impress anyone. I walked through gardens that had gone wild, flowers I did not know the names of, purple, yellow, white, growing where they pleased, climbing over walls, pushing through cracks in the stone paths. I found a bench in a shaded corner of the garden. I sat down. The sound of the river was very clear here. On an island you are surrounded by water, and water has a voice, not a loud voice, a continuous voice, a voice that does not stop, day or night, year after year, century after century. I listened to the voice of the river, and I thought about how strange it was that water, a thing with no brain, no heart, no memory, could sound so much like something that was trying to tell you something. Maybe water was not trying to tell me anything. Maybe I was the one doing the telling. Maybe the river was just a mirror for whatever was inside me. And what was inside me today, on this island, in this garden, was a kind of gratitude so large that I did not have a word for it. Not gratitude for anything specific, just gratitude for being here, for being alive, for being able to sit on a bench on an island in the middle of a river and listen to the water and feel the sun on my face and smell the flowers that were growing wild because no one was left to prune them. Gratitude for the world, even this world, this empty world, this silent world, this beautiful, stubborn, patient world. I stayed on the island until evening. I watched the sun set from the western shore. The desert hills on the far bank turned from gold to red to purple. The river turned from blue to silver to black. And as the last light faded, I saw something I had not expected. Fireflies. Tiny green lights, flickering among the flowers. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. I had not seen fireflies since I could not remember since when. Maybe I had never seen them. Maybe this was the first time. They moved through the garden like small, slow, wandering stars, each one lighting up for a moment, then going dark, then lighting up again somewhere else, as if they were playing a game, as if the game had rules that only they understood. I watched them for a long time, and I thought about the bioluminescent tube I had carried on my first journey. The tube of glowing algae from Florence. I had given it to Anna in Siberia, and now here, on another continent, in another year, another kind of life was making its own light, without any help, without any tube, without any scientist. Just light, made by small living things in the dark, because that is what living things do. They make light, even when no one is watching. That night I slept on the island, in the ruins of the temple, on a stone floor that was cool and smooth. The fireflies were still there when I closed my eyes, their small green lights moving behind my eyelids, like the last thoughts before sleep, like the first thoughts after waking. I slept deeply, and in my dream, the river was speaking, not in words, in rhythm, in the rhythm of water moving over stone, over sand, over time. The river was saying what rivers always say: I am still here. I am still here. I am still here. In the morning, I rode back to the promenade. I walked through the streets of Aswan one more time. I found a small market near the waterfront, a spice market. The stalls were still full, pyramids of spices on wooden trays: cumin, coriander, cinnamon, turmeric, hibiscus, dried red flowers that the Egyptians made into a drink, a cold, tart, sweet drink. I took a handful of the dried hibiscus flowers. I found a clay pot in a nearby house. I boiled water over a small fire. I steeped the flowers. The water turned deep red, the color of rubies, the color of sunset, the color of the inside of a pomegranate. I poured the hibiscus tea into a glass. I drank it, tart, sweet, cold. No, it was hot. I had just boiled it, but it tasted cold, as if the tartness tricked my tongue into feeling cold, and it was beautiful, in the way that a taste can be beautiful, in the way that something entering your body can change the way you see the world for a moment. I drank 2 glasses, then a third, and I thought about tea, about how on every part of this journey, in every country, there had been tea, or something like tea. A hot drink made from leaves or flowers or roots. A ritual of boiling water and waiting and pouring and drinking. Every civilization had invented this ritual independently, because every civilization had understood the same truth, that boiling water and pouring it over something fragrant and sitting still while you drink it is a way of being human, a way of saying to the world, I am not running, I am not fighting, I am sitting, I am drinking, I am here. I left Aswan in the afternoon, back in the felucca, continuing south. The river narrowed further, the cliffs closed in, the granite walls rose on either side like the walls of a corridor. I was heading toward the southernmost point of my journey, toward a place I had heard of but never seen. A place where, 4,000 years ago, a pharaoh had carved his own face into a cliff, twice. Each face 20 meters tall, each face looking south, toward Africa, toward the unknown, toward whatever lay beyond the edge of the map. Abu Simbel. It took me 3 more days to reach Abu Simbel. The river became a lake, a vast artificial lake, created decades ago when a dam was built across the Nile. The dam had flooded a valley, had drowned villages and temples and ancient places. But it had also created this lake, and on the shores of this lake, the most important temples had been cut from the rock and moved, piece by piece, to higher ground. I sailed across the lake. It was enormous. The far shore was barely visible. The water was deep blue, almost black in places, and completely still. No current here, no flow, just an immense body of water holding its breath. I saw Abu Simbel from far away, 2 dark shapes on the western shore, carved into a cliff, or rather, carved into a cliff that had been moved stone by stone to this new cliff. When the lake had risen, as I sailed closer, the shapes became clear. Faces, 4 enormous seated figures, each one 20 meters tall, each one carved from the living rock, each one representing the same person, Ramesses II, the pharaoh who had built more monuments than any other pharaoh, the pharaoh who had wanted, more than anything, to be remembered, and he had been remembered for 3,000 years, and he was being remembered now, by me. The last visitor, the last pair of eyes to look up at his enormous stone face and feel the weight of his ambition. I tied the felucca to a rock on the shore. I walked up the sandy slope to the base of the temple. The 4 statues sat in a row, their hands on their knees, their faces looking south. Calm, massive, eternal. One of them had been damaged. Its upper body had fallen long ago and lay in pieces at its own feet. But the other 3 were perfect. Their faces still sharp, their expressions still serene. I stood at the feet of the nearest statue. I looked up, and I felt very small. Not in a bad way, in the way that standing next to the ocean makes you feel small, in the way that looking at the stars makes you feel small. A smallness that is not a diminishment, but a perspective. A reminder of proportion. I was small. This statue was large. The pharaoh's desire to be remembered was large. The river was large. Time was large. And I was small, and my smallness was not a weakness. My smallness was what allowed me to look up, to feel awe, to stand at the feet of a giant and feel, not crushed, but held. I walked into the temple. The doorway between the statues led into a long hall, carved from the inside of the mountain. 8 more statues of Ramesses lined the hall, standing this time. Their arms crossed over their chests, each one holding the crook and the flail, the symbols of kingship. The walls were covered in carvings, battle scenes, Ramesses in his chariot, enemies falling, arrows flying, horses rearing. I walked past the battle scenes. I had no interest in war. Even carved in stone, even 3,000 years old, war was still war, and war was the one thing the world had finally, truly left behind. At the end of the hall I came to a smaller chamber, the innermost room, the Holy of Holies. 4 statues sat against the back wall, 4 gods, side by side. Ramesses had placed himself among them. He was one of the 4. He had made himself a god, but I was not looking at the statues. I was looking at the floor, at the line of light, because Abu Simbel was designed, engineered, calculated, built with a precision that still stunned archaeologists, so that twice a year, on 2 specific days, the light of the rising sun would enter through the doorway of the temple, would travel the entire length of the hall, and would reach this innermost chamber, and would illuminate perfectly the faces of 3 of the 4 statues. The 4th statue, the god of the underworld, was never touched by the light. That was deliberate. The god of darkness stays in darkness. Today was not one of those 2 days. The sun did not reach the inner chamber. The 4 statues sat in shadow, but I imagined it. I imagined the beam of golden light traveling through the darkness of the hall, reaching these stone faces and lighting them up for just a few minutes, twice a year. The whole temple had been built for those few minutes. The 4 giant statues outside, the 8 statues inside, the carved walls, the corridor, the chamber. All of it was a frame for a moment of light, and the moment of light happened whether anyone was there to see it or not. Twice a year, the sun entered, the faces glowed, and then the light moved on. I sat in the dark chamber. With the 4 statues, I did not light my lighter. I sat in the dark. And I thought about what it meant to build something so enormous, so complex, so precise for a moment, that lasted only a few minutes, twice a year. It meant that the pharaoh understood something that I was only now, after walking across the entire world, beginning to understand, that the most important things are not the things that last. The most important things are the things that happen briefly, perfectly, and then pass. A beam of light on a stone face, a firefly in a garden, the taste of hibiscus tea, the ticking of a watch, the smile of a woman whose name begins with M. Brief, perfect, and then gone, but not lost, never lost, because the temple remains, and the temple remembers the light, even in the dark, even in the silence. The temple remembers. I stayed at Abu Simbel for 2 days. On the 2nd morning, I woke before dawn. I went outside, I sat at the feet of the great statues, and I watched the sun rise over the lake. The light came slowly. First the sky changed color, then the water changed color. Then the tops of the statues began to glow, and then the faces, lit from the side by the early sun, golden, warm, alive. Not the precise engineered moment of the solstice, just an ordinary sunrise, but beautiful, deeply beautiful. I sat there until the sun was fully up. Then I stood. I bowed my head to the statues, not to Rameses, not to the gods, to the builders, the nameless workers who had carved this mountain into a temple, who had calculated the angles of the sun, who had spent their lives making something that would outlast them by thousands of years. They had succeeded, and I was the proof. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened it. "I will come back to you, M." The ticking was slower now. I was sure of it. Each tick was separated from the next by a longer pause, as if the watch were taking deeper breaths, as if it was slowing down to match the rhythm of this ancient place. "We're going north now," I said to the watch, "back up the river, and then west, into the desert. There is one more place I need to see before." Before what, I still did not know. But the sentence felt right, even without its ending. I closed the watch, I put it in my pocket. I walked back down to the shore. I untied the felucca. I set the sail, and I turned north. Back up the river. Against the wind this time, with the current, drifting slowly, letting the river carry me. The lake was still. The sky was wide. The statues of Ramesses watched me go, 4 enormous faces, looking south, forever south. I did not look back. I had learned long ago that looking back is a luxury, and some luxuries cost more than they give. I left the Nile. This was harder than I expected, not physically, emotionally. The river had been my companion for weeks, my road, my clock, my mirror. Leaving it felt like leaving a friend who cannot follow you where you are going. But I had to go west. Into the desert, because there was a place out there, a place I had heard of in a whisper or a dream or a half-remembered sentence from some book I could no longer name, that I needed to see. Siwa, an oasis, deep in the western desert, far from the Nile, far from everything. The first days in the desert were brutal, not the romantic desert of stories, not the golden dunes of postcards. This desert was flat, grey, covered in small sharp stones that cut through the soles of my shoes. The sun was not a presence in the sky. The sun was the sky. There was nothing else up there. Just white fire from one horizon to the other. I walked in the mornings. I walked in the evenings. In the middle of the day, I stopped. I found shade wherever I could. Under a rock, under my own blanket, propped up with a stick. Sometimes there was no shade at all, and I simply lay on the ground, with my eyes closed, with my blanket over my face, breathing slowly, waiting for the worst of the heat to pass. I rationed my water carefully. I had filled every container I had before leaving the Nile. But water goes fast in the desert, faster than you think, because the desert takes it from you, through your skin, through your breath, through the simple act of being alive in a place that does not want you to be alive. The desert does not hate you. The desert is simply indifferent, and indifference when you are small and thirsty and alone is worse than hate. On the third day, I began to doubt. Not my direction. I had a compass, an old one, found in a shop in Aswan, still working. I knew I was heading west, but I began to doubt whether the oasis was real, whether it existed, whether it had ever existed, whether I was walking toward something or toward nothing. This is what the desert does to you. It empties your mind the way it has emptied the land. It takes away your certainties, one by one, until all that is left is the walking itself. And maybe that was the point. On the fourth day, in the late afternoon, I saw it green. A thin line of green on the horizon. So thin, I thought my eyes were inventing it. I had heard of mirages. I had experienced them, shimmering pools of water on the road ahead that disappeared when you reached them. But this did not shimmer, this stayed. I walked toward it for hours. The green line thickened, became trees, became palms, became walls of mud brick, became a town. Siwa. The oasis was like nothing I had seen before. It was a world inside a world, a pocket of life in the middle of death, a place where, somehow, water had found its way up from deep underground and had created, in the middle of the driest desert on earth, a garden, palm trees, thousands of them. Date palms mostly, their trunks tall and rough, their crowns spreading wide, creating shade. Beneath the palms, olive trees, fig trees, small gardens with vegetables growing in dark, rich soil that was nothing like the grey stone of the desert outside, and water. Everywhere, water. Small channels of water running between the gardens, irrigation channels built long ago. The water moved slowly through them, feeding the trees, feeding the soil, disappearing into the ground, and coming back up somewhere else. Springs, natural springs. I found one at the edge of the town, a pool of clear water rising from the rock. Warm, not hot. Warm the way the earth is warm when you dig deep enough. The water bubbled up gently, endlessly. It had been bubbling up for thousands of years, maybe millions. I knelt beside the spring. I cupped water in my hands. I drank. The water tasted of stone, of minerals, of time. I drank again and again. And then I sat beside the spring and I cried, not from sadness, from relief, from the simple animal relief of finding water after days of thirst. The body does not lie. The body does not philosophize. The body says water, and when it finds water, the body weeps. I explored Siwa for many days. The town was old, built of mud brick and palm wood. The buildings were thick-walled to keep out the heat. Small windows, low doorways, streets so narrow that two donkeys could not pass each other. At the center of the town, on top of a rocky hill, there was a fortress, an old fortress, crumbling now, its walls dissolving slowly back into the mud they had been made from. But from its top I could see the whole oasis. The green spread out below me like a blanket on the desert floor. And beyond the green, on every side the desert, brown, flat, endless. The oasis was an island of green in an ocean of stone, and I was the only person on the island. In one house, I found a small room that had been used as a kind of pharmacy. On the shelves, jars of dried herbs, small bottles of oil, bundles of dried flowers tied with string. I opened one of the jars. I smelled it. Chamomile, the smell of sleep, the smell of a grandmother's kitchen, the smell of being small and safe and warm. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea that evening. From the dried flowers in the jar, with water from the spring, I sat on the rooftop of the house. I drank the chamomile tea. I watched the stars come out. Desert stars. The same stars I had seen in the Sahara on my first journey years ago. But from Siwa, the stars looked different. Not closer, not brighter, just more present. As if the oasis, by being a small circle of life in the middle of so much emptiness, had created a small circle of sky that belonged only to it, a private sky, a personal arrangement of stars. On my third day in Siwa, I found a lake, not a spring, a lake, a real lake, in the middle of the desert. The lake was salt, very salt, so salty that when I waded in, my body floated without any effort. I lay on my back in the salt water and I floated perfectly, effortlessly, the way I had floated in the cenote in Mexico, the way I had floated in the Caribbean at Tulum. But this was different, because this was a salt lake in the middle of the Sahara Desert. This was impossible. This was a miracle, not a religious miracle, a geological miracle, a miracle of water finding its way through rock and sand and time and emerging here, in this exact spot, and accumulating, over centuries, into a lake. I floated for a long time. The salt stung my eyes when I opened them underwater. But on the surface, with my eyes closed, with my ears below the waterline, the world was silent. Completely silent. No wind, no birds, no rustle of leaves, just the beating of my own heart, transmitted through the water, amplified by the salt, coming back to me as a steady, slow pulse, my own heart, the only sound in the world. I climbed out of the lake. My skin was covered in a thin layer of salt crystals, white, glittering in the sun. I looked like I had been dusted with diamonds. I did not wash the salt off. I let it dry on my skin. I let it stay, because the salt was a gift from the lake, and gifts should be worn, not washed away. That evening, sitting on the shore of the Salt Lake, I took out my notebook. I wrote, Siwa, a lake of salt in the middle of the desert. I floated in it today, and for a few minutes I heard nothing but my own heartbeat, and I understood something I have been trying to understand for a very long time. That the world is not silent, the world is full of sound, but most of the sound is too quiet for us to hear. The heartbeat of the earth, the breathing of the sand, the slow pulse of water moving through underground rock. We cannot hear these things because we are too loud. We fill the world with our noise and then we complain that the world is silent. But the world was never silent. We were just never quiet enough to hear it. I closed the notebook. The stars were coming out, one by one, like small truths being revealed, slowly to someone who is finally ready to receive them. I stayed in Siwa for 5 days, the longest I had stayed anywhere since Hunza, because Siwa was a place that did not ask you to leave. Siwa was a place that said, stay, rest, float, drink the water, eat the dates, sleep under the palms. There is no hurry. There has never been a hurry, and I listened and I stayed. But on the 6th morning I woke up and knew, the way you know these things, without deciding, without reasoning, just knowing it was time to go. North, to the coast, to the Mediterranean, to the last stop. I packed my bag, I filled my water containers from the spring, I took a handful of dates for the road. I walked out of the oasis, into the desert, heading north. Behind me, Siwa shrank. The green line thinned. The palm trees became small, then smaller, then they were gone, and I was alone again. In the desert, with the sun and the stones and the silence, but inside me the water of the spring was still cool. The salt of the lake was still on my skin, and the taste of chamomile tea was still on my lips. Siwa was inside me now, and it would stay inside me. The walk north from Siwa to the coast took many days. The desert was the same, flat, stony, hot. But I was different from the man who had walked into the desert weeks ago. I was calmer, slower, more patient. The desert had taught me something, the same thing the river had taught me, the same thing the pyramids had taught me, the same thing the cenotes in Mexico and the mountains in Pakistan and the taiga in Siberia had taught me. That the world is not in a hurry, and neither should I be. On the 5th day of walking north, the air changed. It became cooler, wetter. I could smell salt, not the mineral salt of the desert, sea salt, the salt of waves and wind and open water. I was approaching the Mediterranean. The land changed too. The desert gave way to scrubland. The scrubland gave way to fields. The fields gave way to the outskirts of a city. And then, one afternoon, I came over a low rise, and I saw the sea, the Mediterranean, blue, flat, stretching north toward Europe, toward countries I had already walked through in another life. Italy, France, Greece, Turkey. The sea connected them all. The sea had always connected them all, and now the sea was still there, still connecting. Even though there was no one left to sail across it, and between me and the sea, a city, low buildings, white and yellow, a long waterfront, a harbor with old stone walls, Alexandria. I walked into the city slowly. Alexandria was different from Cairo, lighter, more open. The buildings were lower, the streets were wider, the sky was bigger. This had been a Mediterranean city, a city that looked north toward Europe rather than south toward Africa. A city built by Greeks, ruled by Romans, conquered by Arabs, visited by everyone. The Library of Alexandria had been here once, the most famous library in the ancient world, all the knowledge of all the civilizations gathered in one place, and then destroyed. By fire, by war, by the simple passage of time. The library was gone. It had been gone for 2,000 years, but I could still feel the weight of what had been lost. The books that had burned, the ideas that had disappeared, the questions that had been asked and answered, and then forgotten, because the answers had been written on paper, and paper burns. I walked along the waterfront, the Corniche, a wide road following the curve of the harbor. On one side, buildings, on the other side, the sea. I sat on the stone wall at the edge of the Corniche, my legs hanging over the water. The Mediterranean lapped against the stones below me, gently, rhythmically. This was the same sea I had seen from the other side. From Venice, from the coast of France, from the cliffs above the Adriatic. But from here, from the southern shore, the sea looked different. It looked like a beginning rather than an end, a door opening outward toward the rest of the world. I walked deeper into the city. I found a building, large, modern, with glass walls and a wide entrance. A sign, half fallen, said something in Arabic and something in English. Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the new library of Alexandria, built decades ago, to replace the one that had been lost 2,000 years earlier. The doors were open. I went inside. The interior was vast, a great hall, with a ceiling that sloped like the surface of the sea, with shelves, hundreds of shelves, curving along the walls, rising from floor to ceiling, and on the shelves books, thousands of books, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, in Arabic, in English, in French, in German, in Italian, in languages I could not identify. Every subject, every field, every question that a human mind had ever asked and tried to answer, and all of it waiting. I walked among the shelves. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books, each one a different world, each one a door, each one a voice waiting to speak to whoever opened it. I pulled one book from the shelf. At random, I opened it. It was a book of astronomy, in English, with diagrams of the solar system, maps of constellations, photographs of nebulae, clouds of gas and dust, light years across, where new stars were being born. I looked at the photographs for a long time. Stars being born, even now, even in this empty world, somewhere in the deep reaches of space, new stars were forming, new light was being made. The universe was not winding down, the universe was still creating. I put the astronomy book back. I took another, and another, and another. I spent hours in the library, reading fragments, looking at pictures, touching pages that other hands had touched. In a time when touching pages was an ordinary thing, I found a book of poetry in English. I opened it to a random page. A single line caught my eye. I will not quote it exactly, but it said something like this, that the world is not made of atoms. The world is made of stories. I closed the book. I held it against my chest. Yes, that was right. The world was made of stories, and the stories were still here, in this library, on these shelves, in the ink on these pages. The people were gone, but the stories remained, and as long as the stories remained, the people were not entirely gone. They were here, between the covers, waiting to be read. I stayed in the library until evening. Then I walked back to the waterfront. I sat on the stone wall again. I watched the sun set over the Mediterranean. The sky turned the colors I had seen over every body of water on this journey. Gold, orange, red, purple, then dark blue, then the first stars. I took the watch from my pocket for the last time. I opened the cover. I will come back to you, M. I held the watch to my ear. One tick, a long silence. One more tick, a longer silence, and then nothing. The watch had stopped, not the hands. The hands had been stopped for as long as I could remember, frozen at 11:04, but the ticking, the ghost rhythm inside the watch, the impossible pulse that had accompanied me across continents and oceans and deserts and mountains, it was gone. I held the watch in my open palm. I looked at it for a long time. I was not sad, I was not afraid, I was complete. The watch had finished its work. It had kept me company for as long as I needed company. It had ticked when I needed to hear ticking. It had been a heartbeat when my own heartbeat was not enough, and now it was done. I closed the cover. I placed the watch on the stone wall, beside me, facing the sea, open to the salt air and the evening light. I left it there, for the wind, for the rain, for the waves that would one day maybe rise high enough to touch it, for the next traveler who might find it and open it, and read the words inside and wonder who M was. Let them wonder. Wondering is a gift. I stood up from the wall. I was lighter now, without the watch, without the ticking, without the question. I did not need to know who M was anymore. I did not need to keep the promise, because the promise had already been kept. Every step I had taken had been a keeping of the promise. Every country I had walked through, every candle I had lit, every glass of tea I had drunk, every silence I had listened to, all of it had been a coming back, a returning, not to a place, to a way of being. And now I was here, on the shore of the Mediterranean, at the edge of a library full of stories, with the taste of hibiscus tea and chamomile and dates still somewhere inside me. I was here. I walked along the Corniche. The night was warm. The sea was dark. The stars were reflected in the water, so that there were stars above me and stars below me, and I was walking between them. I found a small house near the waterfront. I went inside. I lay down on a narrow bed. I pulled a thin blanket over me. I placed the tesbih beside me, the only thing I still carried. The wooden beads from Cappadocia, the oldest companion. I passed the beads through my fingers. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm, the pulse, still there, always there. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw the whole journey, not as a map, not as a list of places, as a feeling of walking, of seeing, of being small in a large world, of touching things that had been touched before, of leaving things behind for hands that might never come. A feeling of gratitude so deep it had no bottom, like the cenotes, like the underground rivers, like the well of the oasis, gratitude without an object, gratitude for everything, for nothing, for the fact that anything existed at all. Outside, the Mediterranean moved against the shore, the oldest sea, the sea that had carried the oldest ships, the sea that had connected the oldest civilizations, still moving, still breathing, still carrying, and somewhere, very far away, or very close, I could no longer tell, I heard music, a few notes, a piano, maybe, or the wind, playing the strings of a fishing boat in the harbor, or just the rhythm of the waves themselves, which if you listen long enough, becomes a melody. A few notes, then silence, then a few more notes, then I smiled. I did not open my eyes, I just smiled. And I let the sea and the stars and the stories in the library and the salt on my skin and the whole ancient, patient, beautiful world hold me. One more night, one more breath, one more silence.